in the bustling city of Lagos, there lived a very nice and holy man named Babatunde. At least that was what everyone thought. He was a trader who worked hard to provide for his family of 5 children. Among his children was Sade, the youngest and his favorite. Babatunde treated Sade differently. He paid her school fees on time, bought her beautiful dresses from Balagan Market, and gave her snacks that her siblings could only dream of. Sade didn't question her father's love. To her, he was a kind man who wanted the best for her. One night, while she was sleeping on the mattress she shared with her elder sister, she woke up suddenly. The room felt strange, and a heavy shadow loomed over her. It was her father. His voice was soft but firm as he told her to follow him to his room. Sade's mom is a very busy person. She traveled to the north. She always traveled to the north once every month to buy maize, beans, and other things to sell. So Babatunde was alone that night. Sade trusted her father completely. To her, he was a good man and the best father who would never harm her. She followed him sleepily to his room, wondering why he had woken her so late. Inside the room, Babatunde asked her to sit on the bed. "You know you're my special daughter," he said, smiling gently. "I want to teach you something important for your future." Sade felt confused but nodded. That night, Babatunde's actions left her shocked and heartbroken. It was as though her world had turned upside down. She wanted to scream, but her voice stayed stuck in her throat. When it was over, Babatunde told her, "You must never speak of this to anyone. It's our secret, Sade. Promise me." The next morning, Babatunde acted as if nothing had happened. When Sade felt unwell, he took her to the hospital, answering all the doctor's questions with confidence. Sade sat quietly, hoping someone would notice her pain, but no one did. Sade returned home from the hospital feeling uneasy. Her body ached, and her heart felt heavy. Yet, life in their crowded compound carried on as if nothing had changed. Neighbors laughed and chatted in the courtyard, children played football near the kiosk, and her siblings argued over who would fetch water next. But Sade's world was different now. She avoided Babatunde's eyes and stayed close to her mother whenever possible. Mama Tunde, a busy trader who frequently traveled to buy goods, barely noticed the shift in her daughter's behavior. Sade longed to speak up but feared her father's stern warning. "If you tell anyone, something bad will happen to this family." Weeks passed, and Babatunde's behavior didn't change. He continued to buy Sade gifts, making her siblings jealous. Her elder sister Tola often complained, "Why does Babatunde treat you like a princess? What about the rest of us?" One night, Babatunde came into the room again. Sade felt the familiar fear creep in as he motioned for her to follow him. "If you don't come, I'll stop paying your school fees," he whispered. The threat struck her deeply. Sade loved school and didn't want to lose the chance to become a teacher someday. That night, Sade promised herself that she would find a way out of the darkness her life had become. She didn't know how or when, but she held on to the hope that someday her voice would be heard. Babatunde's threats weighed heavily on Sade, yet she continued to go through the motions of daily life. At school, she forced a smile whenever her friends cracked jokes. Deep down, she envied their carefree laughter. Her teacher, Mrs. Adebayo, noticed Sade's quiet demeanor. "Sade, is everything okay at home?" she asked one day after class. Sade froze. She wanted to speak but couldn't. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, warning her to stay silent. She nodded quickly and left the classroom, feeling ashamed. That evening, Babatunde brought her fried meat from the market. He smiled warmly, as if trying to erase the fear he had planted in her heart. That night, Babatunde came again. This time, Sade fought to stay awake, hoping to avoid his shadow entering the room. But he was persistent. "If you don't come, you'll regret it," he hissed. Sade got up reluctantly and followed him. When it was over, she returned to her mattress and buried her face in her pillow, sobbing quietly. Tola stirred and turned toward her. "What's wrong with you, Sade? Why do you cry in your sleep so much?" Sade didn't answer, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She felt trapped, her small world closing in on her with each passing day. The next day, Babatunde gave her money to buy snacks, pretending to be the caring father everyone believed he was. Her siblings scowled with jealousy, wondering why Sade always got the best treatment. At school, Sade found solace in her books. Reading stories of heroes and strong women gave her a brief escape from the nightmare at home. Her best friend Ao noticed her quietness and asked, "Why don't you laugh like you used to, Sade? Did someone hurt you?" Sade wanted to trust Ao, but the words wouldn't come out. "I'm just tired," she muttered, forcing a smile. Ao wasn't convinced, but she didn't press further. That afternoon, the school counselor, Mrs. Omalara, gathered the students for a talk about reporting problems at home. "If something is wrong, speak up," she said. "No matter how big it feels, there's always someone who can help you." For the first time, Sade considered telling someone. Could Mrs. Omalara be the person to break her silence? She wasn't sure, but the thought gave her a faint glimmer of hope. Sade couldn't hold it in anymore. One evening, while her siblings were outside playing, she found her mother sitting on the edge of the bed, counting the money she had made that day. Sade stood there, trembling. "Mama, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Mama Tunde looked up. "What is it, Sade?" "I'm busy." Sade took a deep breath. "It's Baba. Baba has been doing something bad to me." Mama's hands froze mid-count. "What do you mean?" Sade swallowed hard, then told her everything. She spoke quickly, afraid her courage would leave her if she stopped. When she finished, she looked at her mother with tear-filled eyes, hoping for comfort. But Mama Tunde laughed nervously. "What kind of nonsense are you saying? Are you dreaming, Sade? Baba Tunde, your own father. Don't speak such rubbish again." Sade stared at her mother in disbelief. "I'm not lying, Mama. It's true," she said, her voice cracking. Mama Tunde's face hardened. "If you say this to anyone else, they will laugh at you. You want to bring shame to this family. What evil spirit has entered you to make you say such things?" Tears rolled down Sade's cheeks as Mama stood and wagged her finger. "You will stop this nonsense talk. You must be sick." When Babatunde returned home that night, Mama Tunde didn't waste time. "Your daughter has lost her senses," she said with a sarcastic laugh. "She claims you've been doing bad things to her." Babatunde froze for a moment, then scowled at Sade. "What are you talking about? Have you gone mad?" he barked. Sade felt her body shrink under his glare. Mama Tunde waved her hand dismissively. "It's the devil whispering in her ear. I'll take her to the church tomorrow to pray for her." Sade went to bed that night feeling more trapped than ever. The one person she thought would save her didn't believe her. After that night, Babatunde changed. He no longer smiled at Sade or treated her like his favorite. One evening, he called her aside while the family was eating dinner. His face was cold, his voice low. "If you keep talking nonsense, I will stop paying your school fees. You'll drop out and see how hard life can be." Sade didn't respond. She looked at the floor, her heart pounding. She didn't want to lose her chance to go to school, but a part of her felt relieved. Babatunde stopped giving her gifts and snacks. For the first time in a long while, he left her alone. He didn't come to her room at night or call her to his anymore. She was happy about the distance, even though she still felt trapped in the same house. For weeks, Sade felt a small sense of peace. She could sleep without fear of her father's footsteps in the dark. She focused on school and began to enjoy her books again. Her siblings noticed the change. "Ah, Sade, you're not Baba's princess anymore," her brother teased. Sade shrugged, pretending not to care. But inside, she hoped this peace would last forever. One evening, Mama Tunde returned from a trip to Ibadan with plenty of goods. The house was lively as the children helped unload the bags, laughing and chatting. Sade felt almost normal again. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't last. Babatunde's silence wasn't forgiveness. It was a warning, and she feared what might happen if he decided to act again. The night before Sade was to leave for senior high school, she thought she was finally free. Babatunde hadn't disturbed her for weeks, and she believed he had moved on. But at dawn, she felt a hand shaking her awake. "Sade, get up," Babatunde whispered sharply. She froze, her heart sinking. "Please, Baba, don't," she pleaded softly, too tired to cry. His face was dark with anger. "If you fight me, your school life ends tomorrow. You won't step foot in that school again." Sade sat up slowly. The dream of going to senior high school was her only escape from this nightmare. If she lost that, she had nothing left. Feeling defeated, she got up and followed him. This time, Sade refused to go to Babatunde's bedroom. "Not there," she said quietly, her voice trembling. He frowned but didn't argue. Instead, he led her to the kitchen. The place where Mama Tunde usually cooked meals now felt cold and lifeless. The pots and plates on the shelves seemed to watch as Babatunde claimed the last piece of Sade's strength. When it was over, she returned to her mattress and lay down beside her sister. The tears didn't come this time. She felt too empty to cry. The next morning, Babatunde acted as if nothing had happened. He handed Sade her school provisions, gari, sugar, and a carton of noodles, as if he were a kind, loving father. "Make sure you study hard," he said with a smile. Sade didn't say a word. She carried her bag and walked to the bus stop, praying this new chapter at school would give her a chance to start over. Sade arrived at senior high school with a mix of relief and fear. The school campus was lively, with students chatting and laughing as they settled into their dormitories. For Sade, this was her chance to escape her father, even if only for a while. Her bunkmate, Yewanda, was friendly and talkative. "You'll love it here," she said, unpacking her things. "The teachers are strict, but the food is better than at home." Sade forced a smile, grateful for Yewanda's chatter. For the first time in a long while, she felt a tiny spark of hope. At night, she could sleep without the fear of Babatunde's footsteps. The peace didn't last long. 2 months into the term, Babatunde showed up at the school unannounced. Sade felt her stomach turn when she saw him standing near the dormitory, holding a bag filled with food and provisions. "Sade, come here," he called out, smiling warmly as if he were a proud father. Reluctantly, she approached him. He handed her the bag. "I brought you food," he said. "You're my daughter. I'll always take care of you." Sade said a quiet thank you and turned to leave, but Babatunde grabbed her wrist. "Don't forget what I told you," he whispered, his voice sharp. "If you ever think of telling anyone, your life here will end." She nodded quickly, pulling her hand away. When she returned to her dorm, she felt sick. Yewanda noticed her pale face. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," Sade lied, forcing herself to unpack the bag as if everything were normal. Inside, along with the food, was a small envelope of money. The gifts felt like chains pulling her back into the nightmare she wanted to escape. Sade dreaded going home for vacations and midterms. School felt like her only safe place, but each time she returned to her family house, the nightmare started again. Babatunde used the same threat every time. "If you don't do as I say, I'll stop paying your school fees," he warned. Sade tried to resist, but fear always won. She told herself she just needed to survive a few more years until she could leave for good. But each visit drained her spirit a little more. One night, after another encounter, Sade returned to her mattress and broke down. The sobs came from deep inside her, louder than she meant them to. Her elder sister, Tola, woke up and turned toward her. "Sade, what's wrong with you? You've been acting strange for a long time," Tola said, her voice filled with concern. Through her tears, Sade whispered, "Baba has been doing bad things to me." Tola frowned, sitting up. "What do you mean? Did something happen in your dream? Why are you talking like this?" Sade wiped her face, realizing Tola wouldn't believe her. She had seen how Babatunde's charm worked on everyone. He was the perfect father in their eyes. "Nothing," she muttered, turning her face to the wall. "I'm just tired." The next morning, Tola mentioned Sade's crying to Mama Tunde. I think something is wrong with her, Tola said. She cries at night and says strange things. Mama Tunde shook her head and laughed. It's her imagination. Maybe she's stressed from school. She glanced at Sade and added, stop dreaming nonsense and focus on your studies. You're too old for this kind of behavior. Sade didn't argue. She just nodded, knowing her voice wouldn't be heard. After finishing senior high school, Sade knew she couldn't stay in her parents' house any longer. She packed a small bag one night and left without telling anyone. She went to her aunt's house, a kind woman who lived in the same town. Her aunt, Auntie Fola, welcomed her warmly. Ah, Sade, it's been a while. Are you here for a visit? She asked with a smile. Sade nodded, not ready to explain the truth. After a few days, she finally gathered the courage to tell Auntie Fola that she wasn't planning to go back home. I want to stay here until my results come out, she said quietly. Auntie Fola, a single mother with no children of her own, was happy to have Sade around. But Baba Tunde wasn't. He visited often, pressuring Auntie Fola to send Sade back. This is not her house, he said angrily one day. She needs to come home. Auntie Fola grew tired of his constant complaints. Sade, I can't keep fighting with your father, she said with a heavy sigh. You'll have to find another place to stay. With no one else to turn to, Sade traveled to Accra, where a friend she had met during her midterm break lived. Her friend, Ajoa, welcomed her into her small apartment. You can stay here, but I don't have much to offer, Ajoa said. Sade didn't care. The streets of Accra, loud and crowded, felt safer than her father's house. She took on small jobs to help Ajoa with rent and food. Every day was a struggle, but Sade felt a strange kind of freedom. I'd rather sleep on the streets than go back home, she told Ajoa one evening. Ajoa didn't ask questions. She just nodded and handed Sade a plate of rice. For the first time, Sade began to dream of a life where she could finally be at peace, even if the road ahead seemed impossible. Sade had been feeling weak for weeks. Her body felt heavy, and no matter how much she rested, the tiredness wouldn't go away. At first, she thought it was stress from her new life in Accra. But when she started feeling feverish and throwing up, she realized something was wrong. She and Ajoa couldn't afford a visit to the hospital, so Sade tried home remedies and over-the-counter medicine. Nothing worked. One afternoon, Ajoa's father came to visit unexpectedly. He took one look at Sade slumped in a corner, her face pale and tired, and frowned. What's wrong with you, girl? He asked. I don't know, sir, Sade replied weakly. Without waiting for an answer, the man grabbed his car keys. We're going to the hospital now. Get up. At the hospital, the doctor ran a few tests and returned with the news. You're pregnant, he said simply. Sade's heart dropped. She felt the room spinning as she struggled to process the words. Ajoa's father looked shocked. Pregnant? Who's responsible for this? He asked, his voice stern. Sade couldn't answer. She stared at the floor, tears welling in her eyes. She knew the truth, but it was too painful to say out loud. You can't stay here, the man said firmly. You have to go back to your parents. They'll take care of this. Sade fell to her knees, sobbing. Please, sir, don't send me back. They'll kill me. My father will force me to get rid of the baby. I want to keep it. Please don't make me go. The man hesitated, taken aback by her desperation. He scratched his head, unsure of what to do. You can't stay here forever, he muttered, but he didn't force her to leave that night. For the first time, Sade felt a flicker of determination. No matter what, she would keep the baby, even if it meant fighting the world alone. Ajoa's father paced the room after hearing Sade's plea. He muttered to himself, this is not my responsibility, but something in Sade's eyes made him pause. She looked so desperate, so afraid. Finally he said, fine. You'll stay here, but only until the pregnancy is far enough along that no one can do anything to harm it. Then you'll go back to your parents. Sade nodded quickly, relief flooding her heart. She wasn't safe yet, But this gave her time to figure out her next move. Every day after that, Sade helped Ajoa clean the house and cook meals, doing everything she could to stay useful. She didn't want to give Ajoa's father a reason to send her away. But deep down, she knew her time there was running out. Sade began looking for another place to stay. She couldn't go back to her father's house, no matter what. One day, while helping Ajoa wash clothes, she overheard a neighbor talking about a school nearby. It wasn't just any school. It was a creche run by a woman who needed extra help. That woman pays well, and she provides food and a place to sleep for her workers, the neighbor said. Sade's heart leapt. Where is the school? She asked. The neighbor gave her directions, and the next day, Sade walked there with trembling hands. She met the proprietor, a stern but kind-looking woman named Madame Eben. I work hard, Sade said quickly. I'll clean, cook, do anything you need. Madame Eben studied her for a moment. You look young, but I need someone. You can stay, but don't give me trouble. Sade smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sade moved into the creche, feeling a small sense of relief for the first time in months. The place was simple, with a small room where she could sleep and a kitchen where she would help cook meals for the children. Madame Eben didn't ask many questions, which suited Sade perfectly. Each day was exhausting but gave her a sense of purpose. She swept the classrooms, washed plates, and helped care for the little ones. The children brought her joy, their laughter filling the air and making her forget her troubles, even if only for a moment. At night, she lay in bed, rubbing her growing belly and whispering to her unborn child. I'll protect you, she promised softly. No one will hurt you the way I've been hurt. Back in Lagos, Babatunde was growing restless. Sade had been gone for months, and no one seemed to know where she was. He visited Auntie Fola again and again, demanding answers. That girl is stubborn, he complained. But she'll come back. She has nowhere else to go. Mama Tunde, unaware of the truth, worried about her daughter's safety. Tunde, what if something has happened to her? Maybe we should call the police. No police, Babatunde snapped. He didn't want attention drawn to the family. She'll come back on her own. You'll see. Sade's pregnancy became more noticeable as the months passed. Madame Eben didn't ask questions, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. Who's responsible for this? She finally asked one day, pointing at Sade's belly. Sade hesitated. It's complicated, she said, looking down. Madame Eben sighed. I don't care about your past. Just focus on your work and don't bring trouble here. Sade nodded, grateful for the woman's understanding. She continued to work hard, saving every small amount of money Madame Eben paid her. She was determined to build a future for herself and her child, far away from Babatunde's shadow. One rainy night, Sade woke up with sharp pains in her stomach. She knew it was time. Madame Eben rushed her to a small clinic nearby, where she spent hours in labor. By dawn, Sade held her newborn son in her arms. He was tiny but perfect, with soft brown skin and curious eyes. Tears streamed down Sade's face as she whispered to him, "You're mine. No one will ever take you from me." The nurses looked at her with pity, but Sade didn't care. For the first time, she felt a sense of strength. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living for someone else now. When Sade's baby was 3 months old, word of her whereabouts reached Babatunde. A neighbor from Lagos had visited the creche and seen her there. Babatunde arrived at the school a few days later, furious. "You think you can run away from me?" he shouted, standing in the courtyard. Sade stood her ground, holding her baby tightly. "I'm not coming back," she said firmly. Babatunde's face darkened. "You've brought shame to this family. Who's the father of that child?" Sade took a deep breath. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "You are." Gasps filled the courtyard as Madame Eben and the staff stared in shock. Babatunde tried to deny it, but Sade refused to back down. "You've hidden your evil for too long. Now everyone will know the truth." The confrontation at the creche changed everything. Word spread quickly, and the community turned against Baba Tunde. Mama Tunde, horrified by the truth, left him and moved in with her relatives. Sade stayed at the creche, continuing to work and care for her son. She knew life wouldn't be easy, but for the first time she felt free. One evening as she watched her baby sleep, Sade whispered, "We'll be okay. I'll make sure of it." Her journey had been painful and full of darkness, but Sade had survived. And now, with her son by her side, she was ready to build a life filled with light and hope.
Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of African folktales. If you enjoyed this story, let me know by leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to African Stories by Ace and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next tale. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and remember, every story holds a lesson.